Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegran, G-R-A-N, group at edinarealty.com or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 3-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners. On this episode, David and Dan recap the Twins' 2-game series against the Detroit Tigers. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. Back after hiatus during the All-Star break, the Twins come out firing out of the gates for the second half of the season. They take both games in Detroit. An odd Saturday-Sunday series, Mr. Thompson.
I know, it was funny because the Tigers had already played 2 games earlier since the All-Star break in a doubleheader on Thursday. So the Twins got the jitters out. If they had any jitters, they played really well.
It's odd because going into the All-Star break, we were pretty down in the dumps, I think, Dan. If anybody listened to that last episode, I think we just seemed a bit sad. What's worse is that you know that it's going to be a long time until the Twins can bounce back after their poor showing against the White Sox. But like you said, now the Twins are 3 games up on Cleveland, 4 games up on the White Sox.
I like the idea of being a little bit in a pennant race because I think the Twins or the Guardians, if they don't win the division, I think have a really good chance of being a wild card too. And so I think that will push both teams, and hopefully at least the Central gets 2 teams in the playoffs.
I would be surprised if that happens, even with the 9 teams that they're letting into the
It's only 6 per league, David. There's no need for moderate hyperbole. Yeah, so right now, Cleveland would be 2.5 out of the 3rd wild card behind the Seattle Mariners right now. And I just think, and the Twins are obviously in as the division leaders, that's good for either team. I think it's good for the Central. They have 2 teams in. They'll push each other.
Well, anyway, while we were away, folks, if you tuned into the All-Star game and the Home Run Derby, there was definitely some interesting things to take note of. We're going to talk a little bit about Buxton a bit later, but the Home Run Derby, so me, Hogs, and Dan had a bet, and we did this whole snake draft. We all got to take our players, and I had Rodriguez. Dan had Soto, so Dan won technically. My guy hit like triple the home runs.
What do you mean technically? I won because Soto won. He was crowned the Home Run Derby champion. There's no technically.
Now, here's the thing, Dan. I hear every single episode from a guy who insists on giving the point totals in Puckett's picks, even though he has more losses in Puckett's picks. I don't see how this is any different there, Mr. Thompson.
It's different because this time I won, right? This is how politics works. It's like the Electoral College, right? I won the Electoral College because I had faith that Soto was going to ultimately be the better. He could have hit more home runs. He could have hit 90 if he needed to, but he didn't need to hit 90. That's the issue.
That's really the problem here. And during the All-Star game, they did one of Dan Thompson's favorite things, which is where they had the pitchers not only mic'd up, like not only were they listening to what the pitchers were saying, the pitchers had a mic and an earpiece to speak to the broadcasters.
It's like in the Sandlot. Like, I mean, all the banter between, like, we were hearing that banter. Here's the thing, though. I will say this, and Hogs made this point on our chat. If you're ever going to do this, it could be in the All-Star game, because I do think that it's interesting. I don't deny that it's interesting. I just think it totally compromises the integrity of the baseball being played, but the All-Star game doesn't matter anymore, so I think that's good.
Well, are you sure? It doesn't seem really to impact the integrity. I mean, it's just the broadcasters telling the pitchers what pitch they want to see them
throw.
My
gosh. Like, can you imagine Dick Bramer getting a chance to tell Sonny Gray what to throw? Maybe he'd be better than Dylan Bundy picking his own pitches or something like that. I don't know.
There was one moment, though, that was pretty funny during that moment where I forget who the pitcher was on the mound, but they told him to throw a back foot slider, and he hit the guy's front foot, and the pitcher was like, oh, that was one of those front foot sliders.
Pretty clever on his feet, anyway.
Yeah, that was pretty quick. Anyway, yes, folks, you can tell we're a bit chipper here, I think, and it's because the Twins performed so well against Detroit, taking both games. So let's go ahead, Dan, jump into the series recap.
Series recap.
This one started really like so many Twins games have lately, where the Twins loaded the bases in the first inning and didn't really maximize it. It ended up not costing them, but they do get the win, but I had this feeling in this game that it was going to come back and bite them.
It certainly felt that way. It always gives me that great feeling that, oh my goodness, look at this offensive production that this team is capable of. But like you said, they just continually fail to capitalize. And I would say, Dan, if you have the bases loaded with no outs, one run isn't enough in this world where we're living where the Twins bullpen, you don't know what they're going to give you each game. You have to be able to score more runs in those situations.
Yeah, they only got the one for Kepler's sac fly, then Kirilov and Miranda both get out. But the Twins still win this game 8-4. They get another run in the third. They get out of some trouble in the sixth, which we'll talk about later. And then they actually scored runs late, and the other team did a little bit, but the Twins scored them first, and so it wasn't so costly. 3 runs in the seventh and 3 runs in the eighth. Tigers get 3 more in the eighth, but it doesn't matter at that point. Twins win the game 8-4.
Yeah, and this series should really be characterized by the Tigers defense in the field. This was rough, Dan. It was like all of the Tigers players were replaced with one of those Lego guys who only have like brick hands, like they could not field the ball for the life of them. And like, I don't know how many errors there were in total on the series, but it was probably triple the amount if they recorded errors in the way that we feel they should be recorded.
Right, with dumbs, kind of like with Hogs.
Yes, exactly.
And there were moments, Scope like not getting the ball out of his glove, or the low throw home that you can't even get the out in the force. I mean, it was kind of like almost like video game mistakes, where you're trying to do too much and get that extra out. And that's what it felt like, because really the Tigers had every chance to win this game, I thought.
There were a lot of opportunities given to them that they shouldn't have had. But so the Twins go 4 for 12 with runners in scoring position, which isn't like abominable. At the same point, that's just not good enough. It felt like more, right? It felt like there were always runners in scoring position anytime the Twins were up to bat.
Yeah, they had 11 hits. They had another walk, I guess. 18 left on base if you add in all the runners, individually. But they do get the job done. A couple other plays that I think we should note. So Nick Gordon had kind of a funky drop. Then ended up not costing. I think just a reminder that Nick Gordon is not the world's best outfielder, nor has he ever really come through the system and been really told that until he came to the majors. And then the other thing, Tyler Duffy. So I remember June 7th, his ERA was 6.55. And there was talk like, oh, you got to DFA him. Well, look at this. His ERA is down to 3.86. He's thrown 13 consecutive scoreless appearances. And I just think that's a huge credit to the way that they've been able to manage his innings and give him into lower leverage situations.
Yeah, I mean, even in this game, right, it was 5-1 at the time when he comes in the seventh, so that's probably low leverage. It's kind of hard to say, though, right? I don't know. It's hard for me to describe what a true low leverage situation is. Like, what is the true gap between like a standard level or average level of leverage or versus this extreme level? It's just leverage. It's a hard word to understand, Dan. That's what I'm trying to say. The only other note I want to make about this game, Dan, is if your starting pitcher gets into the sixth inning, you should not need 5 more pitchers. Right? Like, that just seems like too many. And so after Ryan, who we didn't even really mention this, we'll talk about him a bit later, but Ryan had a great outing. But the thing is, then it went Pagan, Duffy, Moran, McGill, Duran. And that's just too many guys. But anyway,
I will say this about that though, because this is just a 2-game series coming off a long break. They have another day off before they play Milwaukee. They have another day off after the Brewers series. Like, I think Rocco can afford to play the matchups game a little bit more here because of that.
I don't know how much of this was matchups. You think it was all matchup based?
I think that's some of it. I think also getting arms out there after a long break rather than waiting, because if these guys don't pitch in this series, I mean, it's going to be more than a week since they last pitched if they wait until the Brewers series. I think that's part of it.
Again with this, I make any sort of criticism of Rocco and you come running to his defense. I don't understand it. And you make criticism of Rocco all the time. We didn't even mention who was on the mound for the Tigers, right? Michael Pineda on the mound, only went 3 innings pitched, gave up 2 earned runs, but my goodness, he didn't look good. And I think maybe the Twins letting him go with his current 5.27 ERA at the end of last season was the right call.
It does seem that way. Well, let's go to game 2. The Twins win this one as well, 9-1. They get 3 in the first this time, though. Again, it didn't really feel like they were clean. It didn't feel like a clean 3. It felt like Detroit certainly contributed to that.
Had the Twins been able to score like 5 runs in the first this time around, I think it would have felt a little bit more successful. And part of that's because Urshela grounded into a double play to end out that sort of rally, which is disappointing. He sort of redeemed himself a little bit later in the game. He had a double with a couple of RBIs. But the thing is, when you have these bases loaded, it's like do anything but hit into a double play, right? Like anything at all besides hit into a double play.
But the Twins, they go 4 for 13 with runners in scoring position, so very similar to the first game. But again, they cash in late. The Tigers get 1 in the 4th, and then the Twins' bats were quiet through those middle innings. But in the 7th, they get some big hits. They get 3 runs then, and then they just keep tacking it on here. And the Tigers really were hopeless and helpless against Sonny Gray.
Yeah, Sonny Gray, it was so good to see him bounce back after the rough outing he had against the White Sox. And when we went into the All-Star break, we were honestly a little bit nervous about both Sonny Gray and Joe Ryan, because Ryan's last start before the All-Star break wasn't great either. So to see both of those guys coming out firing, great to see, and to see him get at least into the 6th inning. In Gray's circumstance, he got all the way through the 6th.
And I know they're playing the Tigers, but the Tigers did sweep the Guardians before the break. I mean, it wasn't like these Tigers have been destitute. They clearly have some talented players. They don't have the pitching right now. I think that their relievers are great. Their starters have been bad. And the Twins were able to do enough to hold them off, and their own bullpen did pretty well.
Yeah, so they used 7 pitchers. I think one of those was a position player, but Sonny Gray pitched well. Then we went Jax Cotton and Joe Smith getting back into the action after his rough outings against the White Sox prior to the All-Star break. He finishes out the game with a clean inning.
Joe Smith, by the way, this was his 863rd appearance. I feel like I had no idea who Joe Smith was before he joined the Twins, and I'm a little embarrassed by that. Like, that's the most in the majors among active players. That's a lot of baseball. He's been pitching since 2007. Did you know who he was before this?
I mean, I'm sure I would have told you I did, because Joe Smith is a pretty common name, I would think, Dan. Like, that's really his problem. It's too, you know who Miguel Cabrera is. Right. Then again, I guess there was another Miguel Cabrera in the league a while back, so maybe that's not a good example.
But it feels like, whenever I hear Joe Smith, I think, well, there must be some other new Joe Smith. Like, I didn't think it was the same person for the last 15 years playing pitcher. Anyway, we've talked far too long about these games. I think we got to move into our segments.
Catch 'em all, Kirby Puckett!
Puckett's Picks winner.
We did a little bit of a switch, which affected me negatively. Shocking. I know every single time.
Too. Well, I guess you technically more than me.
No, me technically more than you. But so anyway, it was found out that Buxton was not going to play in the Detroit series prior to the Detroit series starting, and we have a long-standing rule: if a guy is ruled out of contention to play in a series ahead of the series, we allow for a switch for Puckett's Picks. So the listeners took Arise instead of Buxton. I took Correa because I always take Correa if he's available. Dan took Polanco. And because of this switch, the listeners take the win with 7 points from Arise. Really disappointing because Dan and I both tied with 6, and I would have won the tiebreaker.
Right, which means that you're going to pick last, actually, when we get up to Puckett's Picks later. So I guess I'll give the season series here. So you still have your lead with 13. I have 10. The listeners got their first win in a very long time. So kudos to the listeners for getting that win. And again, I lead in the season points scored, 168 to 156 to 128. Always going to keep giving it. I get that it's hypocritical after what I said earlier or about the home run derby. Fine.
Only by, in a couple of episodes, Dan, when I surpass you in both wins and point totals, I think that's going to suddenly just drift away off of your typical ritual here.
All right, let's keep going here to our next segment.
Beast versus Bench.
Is losing fun? Is losing fun?
Beast versus Bench, Dan, and I think it's fun with these series. It's only 2 games, and so it's a smaller sample size, but there were some options to pick. So who'd you go with as your Beast?
I went with Arise, and it's mostly because of his big RBI hit in Game 1 with 2 outs and kind of a lofting single to right. I thought that was really the biggest play in that sense that he provided. Again, he did have 3 hits in Game 1, and then in Game 2, he did have another hit with another RBI. I just think he gave him a lot of quality at bats at the top of the lineup, and so that's why he's my Beast. What about you?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with a combination of both Gray and Ryan. So I've sort of come to Dan's thinking as far as Beast or Bench for starting pitchers, and I think this is a nice segue into allowing myself to pick pitchers, especially starting pitchers for these roles, because both Ray and Ryan performed very well in this series. So I think it's a good segue, right, to choose 2 guys as my Beast. Both were in both games for a significant portion. So I got to give it to the starting pitching. It was very well done. It helped me with my optimism for the back half of the season.
And each of them got into the 6th inning, which is something that the Twins have desperately needed. Who's on your bench?
Yeah, so I have to give it to Moran. Like I said, it's a good segue because it was a good stepping stone. Gray and Ryan is my Beast, and then I'm going to give it to a reliever for my bench. This will not happen often, but truly, the biggest reason why I feel this way, 1, he gave up 3 earned runs, but 2, it forced Rocco to use more pitchers. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, and I understand what you're saying, that, it's good to get these guys out of the bullpen, but you're telling me if he could have ridden Moran through the end of the game, he wouldn't have? I think he would have.
Yes, basically. What I said earlier, I get that. I also get this too. I think that makes a lot of sense. And by the way, his ERA is only 2.33 even after that. He's been actually pretty dang good. And McGill has been pretty good.
But he's only been up with the club. I mean, he hasn't been up in the majors all that often.
I know, but still, I'll take a 2.33 ERA. He's got enough odd digits after that it must be worth something, right? So anyway.
Fair enough. Okay, who do you have on your bench, Dan?
I went with Nick Gordon. He was 0 for 6 in the series, 3 strikeouts. He had an error. Yeah, he's playing a little bit out of position, but this is going to come up later with the Sano question. There's a lot of scenarios in which, there's one scenario in which he could be the primary backup center fielder here, and that does give me some doubts. So he didn't really show enough there for me to feel very comfortable in that. He did have a nice catch in the outfield. He robbed a home run, but he was playing left field then, not center.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick overall. He has value, obviously, in his versatility. But again, you've been on that Nick Gordon bandwagon a lot longer than I have. Certainly.
I mean, it was just one bad series. Like, I'm giving him the bench here because I don't know who else to give it to, because everybody else, positionally at least, had pretty good games, at least in one of the two.
Let's keep pushing here, Dan. Rocco's Rewind.
Rocco's Rewind.
You have all this stuff about the pitchers here, so I'm going to let you go here and keep on that pitching train.
Yeah, so I have sort of a encouragement to Rocco, and then also a little bit of chastisement also. So I would say as encouragement, it was great with both Gray and Ryan, letting them both get to the mid-80s for their pitch count, but especially with Sonny Gray, I think that you could have let him come out for the 7th inning. Joe Ryan was starting to get hit a little bit, but I think in this instance, I think you can let him go a little deeper, and we're going to need them to go deeper, especially if there's any real chance at a postseason run.
Yeah, I think that choice was clearly made after the 6th and not between the top of the 7th and the bottom of the 7th, because if it is 6-1 already in the 6th, I do think he probably does get a chance to start the 7th.
Could be, I hope so, but I would say I would encourage letting our effective starters go as deep as they really want to, and I'd be surprised if either of those guys wanted to be taken out.
Well, and we've seen other teams throw like 118 pitches. I know it was one of the guys in the last series, so it can be done. I went with a bit of a question for Rocco here, because without Buxton in the lineup, they went Ortiz, Correa, Polanco, I think in both of these games. And I wonder if Rocco would consider batting Buxton cleanup after those three. And I say that also knowing that they loaded the bases here pretty easily with that trio. Would you do that? Would you put Buxton cleanup?
I wouldn't mind it, I don't think, but it does bother me that you are taking probably at least one at bat away from Buxton through the course of a game, and probably more than that on average. So I'd still want to see him in that third spot, because I think I'd rather have a Buxton at bat than a Polanco at bat.
I just think it's something to monitor, because I wonder if that's a way to tinker with this lineup just a little bit and maybe give Buxton some more RBI opportunities here that aren't really relying on home runs. He has so many RBIs out of his home runs this season and not a lot in other situations. I think largely because he's batting first, second in the lineup. But I would just love to see him come up to bat with more guys on base a little bit more, because he's not a risk to grounded to double plays in the way that, say, Correa is, or maybe Sano. So I don't mind having him a little bit later in the batting order for that reason.
Well, I think a point in your favor is that when Luis Arraez is likely to get on base, 60% of the time, whatever his on base percentage is currently, it's one of those things where, yes, maybe you're not taking in a bat away from Buxton if you bat him fourth, just because of Luis Arraez's ability to get on base.
All right, well, let's go into our Minnesota moment.
Minnesota moment.
Why don't you start us off there, Mr. Thompson?
So in the 6th inning of game 1, I was actually driving and I'm listening, and Green gets a triple to the kind of that deep part in right center. And so there's nobody out, and then Baez singles him in, and it looks like this is a game that's going to get away from the Twins here. But Ryan gets a couple outs, including a strikeout of Miguel Cabrera, and then Rocco pulls him, brings in Pagan, and he gets out of the inning with just 2 pitches. And I thought that was the key moment of the series, because then the Twins were able to tack on the runs, but they were doing so already ahead in the game. So I thought big moment, set up the rest of that game and really set up the win in the series.
I think that's a good choice. It's interesting that it's not an offensive perspective and it's a defensive one,
well,
but I do think that it's very important to the win in that game.
What about you?
Yeah, I have to go with actually scoring some runs after having the bases loaded in the first inning. And granted, like I said, I think 5 runs is like, yeah, you're probably asking for too much. And like even 4 runs, I think that means that things went really well. But I think if you load the bases in the first inning and you come away with 3 runs, I'm very happy with that. I was very happy to see that after we've seen it again, time and time again, where the Twins just can't get those runs across when they get runners on in the first inning. So to see them actually do that was just very, I was very happy to see. And again, 3 runs, I'll happily take every time.
At the same time, they were playing the Tigers. And I don't know that happens against a team with competent defense. So, yes.
Maybe not. It is, I mean, it was some ugly baseball.
Oh
folks.
my
like,
gosh, that 8th inning...
The 8th inning was comical. How long it kept going and the awkwardness with which it took some of these fielders who they clearly have baseball skill, right? Like they're in the major leagues. Like they clearly have some skill, but they just looked like they could not remember what their gloves were for.
And also the Twins hitting some dribblers down the third base line that probably did not deserve to be hits. Anyway,
but part of that was due to the Twins actually hitting the shift a little bit too, right?
And,
like
and I
Kepler beat the
love
shift.
that. And there was even some other moments where they were like bunting down that third base line, or Rise lined up for, I think even, I think it was Polanco. I mean, they were really actively trying to do that. A shame that baseball is going to try to take away the shift next year, just as the batters are actually adjusting to it. And also, that was something that the play-by-play guy pointed out, who was not Dick Bramer, because he was in Cooperstown. Couldn't find his name. I Googled it. I couldn't catch it. So apologies for not remembering, but he was pretty good.
I thought he was great. And to be honest, he sounded a little bit like Provis. So I was like inclined to like him right off the bat. And so, yeah, I do feel terrible because the whole game I was on the TV broadcast for game 1. Game 2, I had the first 3 innings on the radio and then the other one's on TV. And I still never caught the guy's name. And I was kind of annoyed because I was even paying strict attention. They were doing that whole, like, the food of each dugout. You know, they eat something. Right. And they didn't put the names up. I'm like, somebody say the guy's name.
We'll find out at some point here. Well, let's go into Mauer's musings.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Mauer's musings.
Dan, I will say that each of us, this particular segment, have some contentious questions. I don't know that there's people who are like going to fence sit on either of these. There tend to be strong opinions one way or the other. Do you want to start or would you like me to?
I want you to start.
So Buxton didn't play in this series. And the reason he didn't play in this series is because he had to get an injection in his knee after the All-Star game that requires 5 days to heal. We're not sure. It seems a little bit up in the air whether or not that was necessary prior to the All-Star game, and then he just delayed it until after the All-Star game, or something happened at the All-Star game. I'm assuming that they were likely to do this injection regardless of the All-Star game.
I think so too.
So the Twins allowed this to happen knowing that Buxton would not be available for the Detroit series. So my question is, would you have rather had Buxton skip the All-Star game and get the injection so he was ready to come back for this series? Or would you have rather had him go to the All-Star game, which, to be fair, as far as All-Star game appearances go, hitting the game-winning home run is a pretty good one to have.
On a pitch that was like at his neck, it felt like that home run that he hit. And it was a bomb, too. I am on the side that you gotta let Buxton play in his first All-Star game, considering, I think I saw this tweeted out somewhere, like, his health status the last few seasons at the All-Star break, he's on the injured list. It was like 4 of the last 5 years or something like that. Like, the guy has not been healthy. The fact that he put together the first half that he did, yeah, I think it means a lot. I think the All-Star game is an important thing for these guys to be able to go to and participate in.
It's funny that you make a statement for how you feel, and then you offer evidence for why you shouldn't feel that way.
Well,
you're like,
what do you mean? I think that was evidence for me. Like, he should be excited about it.
No, but if you actually like bring that out to the logical conclusion, this guy rarely makes it to the All-Star break not on the IL. He finally gets to the All-Star break not on the IL, and we're going to put him at risk. We're going to put him at risk and let him play in the All-Star game.
So Julio Rodriguez, who plays for the Mariners, center fielder, he, by your count, quote unquote, won the home run derby.
Certainly, yes. I call it the Thompson method.
He hasn't played at least the first 2 games of the Mariners-Astros series because his wrist was sore because of an injury he had the Sunday before that he didn't, quote, know about, apparently until after he played in the home run derby and the All-Star game. So my point is this. The All-Star game is special, and here's the bottom line. The Twins won the 2 games anyway, and so it really does factor into this debate because it doesn't really matter because they won.
I mean, that's the hindsight, right? That we know that he had a great showing in the All-Star game, and we know that the Twins won the 2 games against the Tigers. So all in all, this couldn't have worked out better for the Twins and for Buxton. Me personally, let's just say the Twins lost these games each by 1 run. Would that change your perspective?
It would change my perspective at the end of September if the Twins were a game or 2 out of winning the division or a wild card or something like that. These would have been games where I'd have pointed to say, and especially if they were close. Yeah, the Twins might have made the playoffs if Buxton hadn't played in the All-Star game.
Yeah, that's just, I just hate having to even think about that question.
Well, luckily we don't have to, David, because they won the games.
Yes. I suppose. But I guess all of that to be said, I'm obviously showing my hand a bit here. I think if he knew that he needed the injection, you say, thank you for the honor of going to the All-Star game. I'm going to sit this one out because I need to recover.
It's hard to argue with. That is that is a logical stance, David. There's nothing, I can't criticize that. It's the emotional, I'm letting my emotions get away
and
from
I
here.
get it, right? Like I'm not saying that I think, oh, well, this is dumb that you even think this way. Because I get it. There's clearly some motivation to let him play in the All-Star game. But me, me thinking very selfishly about the Twins, I want Buxton on the field as often as possible, and him going to the All-Star game precluded that from happening.
And he did play the 12 games before the All-Star break, too. So I think that factors in as well.
I think that was a good discussion to have. I enjoyed that. So, folks, every now and again, we throw stuff up on our Twitter for polls and whatnot about upcoming segments. If you want to follow us on Twitter, that'd be great. You can vote in those polls, and we may discuss those. So the poll, I did put this question out, and it was 80% wanted him to go to the All-Star game. So that is what it is.
The people agree with me, David. And also, I'm so excited to talk about my musing because Miguel Sano, his 20 days in AAA purgatory are done now. David, what are the Twins going to do? What happens to him? What happens? Because come Tuesday, when they play baseball in Milwaukee, Miguel Sano may or may not be with the organization anymore. How exciting.
I guess exciting is one word for it. So real quick, did you know about this 20-game rule?
I have learned about it over the last 20 days. Yes.
Right. Well, so here's the thing. Because how often has this been a situation where the Twins have an everyday starter the last 4 seasons, maybe more. I don't remember how long Sano has been like an everyday starter. And now he's potentially poised to come back into the league, and they have to decide whether they want him or not, Dan. Now, I know he's your guy, so you're on the Sano train, certainly. I don't know that I am, Dan. I don't know that I want to upset the apple cart and bring him on and send someone down. I guess, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how much it matters if Celestino's on this roster or not. But what do you want to have happen?
Well, I obviously want Sano to be back. So he's hit a number of home runs. Yes, he's struck out sometimes, but he has basically been who we know Miguel Sano to be at AAA.
And you still want it.
I still want it. The guy hit like 340 or something over his stint with the Saints, which is great. Some towering home runs. I just think you bat him 7th or 8th or 9th in the lineup and you call it a day. I do think Celestino is probably the guy who goes down, and I get that the sacrifice there is that Nick Gordon is going to be your backup center fielder. But here's the thing. If the Sano experiment doesn't go well, you can always bring Celestino back up and cut Sano loose. I just think that's the cleanest way to do this.
And Dan, I mean, maybe he's trade bait, right? I mean, we didn't know how much J-Happ was going to bring in return, and look at that.
I do think Miguel's a little less valuable, I think, to somebody else, given the contract too that he bears as kind of a load around his neck. But I think it's worth a shot.
Maybe they just set him up as a pitcher. Put him up on the block and say that he's a pitcher. See what you can get for him.
Well, I do wish that they could absorb one more bench player instead of a relief pitcher. Like, teams are so careful with their starters now that the ripple effect is that you can't have a Miguel Sano on the roster anymore. I think I'm going to blame starting pitchers here for Miguel Sano not having a chance on this team.
Well, and part of what makes this a crunch too is, like, some people might just look at this roster, and if you just glance at it without thinking critically about it, you might say, well, who is this Hamilton fellow? Just send him down. Well, the thing is, Ryan Jeffers, your at least let's not call him a backup catcher, but who was splitting the catching duties with Sanchez, he's out until September. So you have to have another true catcher on the roster.
And I think too, if Kyle Garlick gets sent away, he has to clear waivers, and he wouldn't clear waivers. Somebody would pick him up. So you can't go away from Garlick. It's a tricky spot. I do think they were kind of hoping somebody might get hurt, and maybe we will hear miraculously of an injury that has occurred to one of these Twins regulars that's going to give them that time for Sano. So we're going to find out in a couple days. It's going to be fascinating to talk to you in a couple days.
Coincidentally, that's what put Sano on the IL was his injury that happened at just the right time.
Right. Maybe something's wrong with Gilberto Celestino's left leg, that we didn't know about. It's possible.
I gave you the option, and you didn't even take it when I brought up Caleb Hamilton, and you didn't even reference the Twins article where they talk about how you have Jose Miranda has not had his uncle, brother, whatever relation he is to the Hamilton guy, his cousin. Sorry, that he hasn't had his cousin out to the ballpark yet, and now Caleb Hamilton is on the roster. Oh, huzzah! How hilarious!
If Caleb Hamilton is a distant relative of the actual Alexander Hamilton, then yes, I would have brought it up. But as far as my knowledge goes, he is not. All right, we need to grade the series, David, here.
Series grades.
Well, this should be a quick segment, Dan. I mean, you scored a bunch of runs. Your pitching seemed somewhat put together, and you won both games. I don't know what to tell you. This is an A for me.
It's an A for me, too. Can't even give it a minus because there was just so little that didn't work, aside from maybe Moran's appearance.
And I'd love to tell you that, they didn't really capitalize on guys in scoring position, or, they left too many guys on base. You still scored a ton of runs. Like, it's just hard to, criticize at this point.
Well, then let's move on to Herbie's headline.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbeck pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
Well, we got a couple of things to talk about. So this one, I am sure everybody has seen this. And if you haven't, folks, you have to go watch this. But so the Blue Jays defeated the Red Sox at Fenway 28-5, 27 of which they scored through the 6th inning. 6 out of 9 innings, Dan, and they scored 28 times.
Well, the best play to me is Tapia comes up, he's got the bases loaded, and he hits a ball to center field. And Boston center fielder Jaron Duran, he almost has no idea where this ball is. He walks up to center field and he just kind of looks around for a little while. The ball lands like 30 feet behind him at the base of the wall, and then he doesn't even try to go pick up the ball.
Doesn't even move.
He just stops. And so the left fielder has to come over and get it. And it's like, what the heck is going on here?
So the result of this play that is absolutely ridiculous is an inside the park grand slam, which I don't know how often you're going to see, if ever, right? Like it's just ridiculous. The center fielder, Dan, this ball falls behind him and he didn't move in the same way that I don't move when the appetizers come out and they're vegetables. Dan, let me tell you, that's how much he did not move towards this ball.
Like your food's food. You don't like that.
No.
Lourdes Gurriel, by the way, was very famously making like a little fruit cocktail in the dugout during one of these innings. He went 6 for 7 with 3 runs, 5 RBI. I mean, it's just gaudy numbers. I can't even do this in a video game. So there was that. The Blue Jays, congrats to them. They're playing great baseball. I believe they swept the Red Sox in this series too, so they looked pretty good. But then the other big news is the Cooperstown and the Hall of Fame induction of 3 former Twins, David.
Yes, David Ortiz, the well-known former Twin, who the Twins have never been mocked for letting go of ever in their history.
But they paid no attention to David Ortiz during this whole thing. Like Tony Oliva, Jim Kaat, congratulations. And it was like David Ortiz was not even mentioned. Like I forgot he was even being inducted, David.
And for the Hall of Fame, that actually still matters as far as the main sports are concerned. You would think that we would care more than we do. But you think it's a weird time because Oliva and Kaat, it's been so long, right,
Sure,
for them to get inducted. And Ortiz just feels so recent that I think that probably hurts sort of the fanfare a little bit.
I think there's an element of that too. And I think, good that Jim Kaat gets in, good that Tony Oliva gets in. Jim Kaat very smartly in his speech thanked his wife and his catchers. He said he'd had 38 catchers over that year. I hope his count is right. So that was pretty cool to see 2 more Twins go in.
And actually in his speech, he was able to not slander anybody, which is a pretty big thing for
Well
Kaat.
then, he probably had that vetted by a number of people, I think, before he gave that speech.
No, sir, you can't say that anymore. We don't use those terms anymore.
Even in Cooperstown, you can't say those things. Anything else about the Hall of Fame, David?
No, let's keep going here. Puckett's picks for the upcoming another 2-game series for the Twins against the Brewers.
And we'll see you tomorrow night.
Puckett's Picks.
So the listeners are going to take somebody that I don't know that they have ever taken. Max Kepler is going to be the listener's pick. And so good on the listeners for kind of going with a wild card. Hopefully Kepler does pretty well. This leaves me in a pickle. David, I don't know who to pick.
You have options and you didn't really have anybody taken away because I don't think Kepler was the first name off the top of your head.
He wasn't. So I know that if I don't take Correa, you will have to take Correa according to your rules here. I kind of want to push you towards that and just make him actually make that pick. So I will go with the platelet-rich Byron Buxton and hope that his knee is ready and he has a great series here in Milwaukee.
I was all ready to take a rise, but I have to take Correa now. You forced me into a corner. I have to take Correa, even though I actually want to take a rise, but I have to take Correa.
You really have painted yourself into a corner with this strategy, David. I don't know how wise it is.
Sooner or later I'm going to have to break off, but the fact that he would have won Puckett's picks for me had the listeners not done a switch makes me feel a little bit better about sticking with the strategy.
A technicality. Well, sir, it's been good to talk with you. We actually really didn't speak, I think, since the last podcast.
No, oddly enough, it was actually a very busy week for me. I should do this quick shout out as well. So when it comes to my teeth, Dan Thompson, I'm not the best person. And so I have been putting off going to the dentist since pre-COVID times. And so I haven't gone since COVID started. So I decided to go to the dentist. Dr. Andy Droll, great guy. Very helpful. But so I went in and he's like, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be since we haven't seen you in so long, which is great, right? But then he said, so you're going to need to schedule some time. And he goes, we can either schedule it out or, we can just make a day of it. And so for me, Dan, I took Wednesday and I said, let's do it, man. And I had all sorts of work done and my mouth still hurts. Dr. Andy, he did great. Nothing against him, but my mouth still hurts. It just is what it is. But anyway, so I gave him some podcast gear. I gave him some stickers and a couple of things. Hopefully he'll put us on the old on the wall so the other patients can see the Men for the Win merch.
Well, I hope you made a good impression for the sake of the podcast, David.
Yeah, no, we go back. Like, I've been going to him for years. So
all right. Well, with all that, I'm going to force your pained mouth to do the outro here. So you go ahead, send us out.
Well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on Twitter at Men for the Win and find our Men for the Win Facebook page. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast to be notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating, that'd be great. A reminder that episodes are now available on our YouTube channel. And if you could drop us a like and subscribe, we'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. And as always, go Twins. That'll wrap up another episode of Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.